Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in bountiful Bakersfield, California, this is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and today you're tuning in to Spell It Out, Magic, Reflections, and Shadows, where I take a topic and run with it. For this month in March, perhaps because there was a lot of talk about the lunar eclipse and the war in Iran astrologically, I realized I really wanted to talk about my ongoing love-hate of astrology, which has been there for quite a while. And why I have this, maybe I'm trying to figure it out myself. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our show. It's really great to have you guys with us again. Just to remind everybody that we are now doing readings at the Enchanted Cottage here in Bakersfield, which is an absolutely wonderful little metaphysical shop. And they only do readings in person. So if you're in the neighborhood, drop by and say hi and pop in and visit. I think you'll really enjoy it. If you're looking for a reading remotely by Zoom or phone, you can just book on our website, mysticraven.net. Our book, Tarot Alchemy, a Kabbalah-inspired approach to reading the cards, is now available on Amazon, so please search under books or you may have a tough time finding it. If you're out and about, you can listen to our show as a podcast. Just go to Spotify or iTunes or wherever you get your podcast and search Sixth Sense Society. We're easy to find. And then please visit our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SXTH, all spelled out. And while you're there, if you can afford to, please buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi. It does help us cover some of our production costs and lets us buy a little bit of new gear every now and again. And we definitely appreciate those of you who so generously supported us in the past. So with that, I'm going to kick it back to you, Krista. So take it away, Krista.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And so Spell It Out is a chance for me to have sort of an opinion piece now and then, though I often do prefer to look at more, research and things like that in topics. But this one's important, I think. I was first thinking, I'm just being a big baby. And then when I was going over my points, I said, well, actually, I have some really, I think, legitimate questions about astrology. And as I said, it's a love-hate relationship. It's not, I'm going to abandon astrology, though sometimes I do take a step back, which I'm sort of on the edge of doing, but I'm not sure. So let me tell you a little bit about how I learned astrology, or how I was introduced to astrology, because I do think it's important, my first introduction. I think I've mentioned it, years ago, but many of you might not have heard it. I went to Steve Forrest, who is a renowned astrologer. At this point, he's written many books. He has a school of evolutionary astrology, and I still have very high opinions of even that first reading. It really made an impression on me. And it was I think it was like late 70s, early 80s that I had a natal chart reading. And he is a Western astrologer. That's his, instead of a Vedic astrologer. And I think that because he was, the style of how he read, the way he approached my chart, I think that really impacted how I thought astrology works, because I found it extremely helpful. And even where he would look at challenges, and he gave me some solid advice, which I actually took to help me with some of the challenges in my chart. So I went to him over maybe only about 4 or 5 times over the years, because he would give you a lot of information to work with. And by the way, it was only $35, and I think it was about an hour and a half. At that time, charts were hand drawn, and so you can see the difference now. And also the at least the East Coast astrological community at that time, because I ended up going to some other astrologers because they emphasized different techniques. Like one fellow was really into midpoints. Another woman I went to was really into sort of trans-planet in your chart, which at the time, things like Saturn and Neptune were seen to be too impersonal to really, they were more generational forces. And so she thought there was more to it. And of course, today there are people that say there's more to it. So I found that they were all very much good at what they did, and I feel like they were doing it for those reasons where they truly loved astrology and had a sense of curiosity about what it means to be human. So that was, again, over sort of, I would say, a good part of the 80s. And that's what I thought astrology was largely about as somebody going to astrologers. Now, I have no idea what the Vedic community was like at the time, but I am going to talk a little bit about the Vedic astrology soon. So so that was the background, and I really was impressed, and I found it really helpful, and I took the advice. So as I got more involved in metaphysics, and I think probably especially over the last maybe 15 years, I started looking at the chart of my own chart myself. And one of the things that really, I find, I guess, really difficult are the competing systems, astrological systems. And so you have, this is just one example, Western versus the Vedic, in which in the Western, I am a Cancer, my sun sign. In the Vedic, I'm a Gemini. And today I told Michael, I said, I actually think I might be a Gemini all these years. And I don't, the thing that I guess, and then also the house systems, which I'm going to go into a little more, the different house systems, because if you use the equal house system versus Placidus, your planets will be in different houses, which are, of course, the arenas in which these energies play out. So I went through maybe a couple years ago, I said, well, I wonder if the Placidus house that I use is the right one for me. So I listened to quite a lot of astrologers talking about what they thought about the house systems. And I think what really bothered me was they all sort of dismissed it on some level, rather than just saying, hey, guys, we're not really sure why it can work. That it's more like, oh, it's like a holograph, and it doesn't matter which system you use. But for me, looking at the chart, it's a big difference to be, a Cancer in the 4th house compared to the 6th house. And so after a while, I did take the advice of one astrologer, said, hey, just decide what works for you by looking at your chart, seeing what makes sense. And they said, well, that seems like at least some good advice. However, along the way, I did find an interesting theory. And this is what I would like to ask the astrological community to do more, is come up with some ideas of why maybe having the different house systems could actually be good. So it's in the book, here we are, Joanne Wickenburg. It has a great book called Your Hidden Powers, Intercepted Signs, and Retrograde Planets. So originally, I got the book for those two reasons. I'm fascinated with retrograde, and also I do have intercepted signs because I use the Placidus house system. So in the book, she actually has a theory about at least 3 different house systems and how they can play off each other. And she has used it herself. So she would ask you to do, there's 2 kinds of equal house systems, one that's based on the midheaven sign starting it, and one based on the ascendant. And then any unequal house system, she said, having those 3 and comparing them. So she says the equal house chart where you start with the ascendant being where you make all the other houses in comparison to the ascendant. She calls it the environment chart. And she says that describes an individual's life as it would be had she or he followed the path of life defined by the environment, never questioning issues of destiny, but rather accepting the concept of fate. She went on to say that often in countries where there is still a caste system, the equal house is actually more popular. And she also has used it with her clients with the other 2 house systems, which I'll mention anyway. The other one is called the destiny chart, and that's where you start with the midheaven and you use an equal house. And that's the destiny is what route would most easily lead you to your social destiny. And then she said the unequal house would be where you would blend them. It blends all of that, making it possible to reach your destiny within your environment by making certain compromises or adjustments. And in the actual book, she gives some really interesting examples of how it would play out. So you understand it better than that. But she's the only astrologer I've ever read that actually thought, okay, maybe using different house systems for different reasons would work. So I would want astrology to do more of that rather than say, hey, it all works. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there are nuances. And again, when you look at the idea that your sun sign can be completely different. And some other planets, I think there's some of my other personal planets are different. And perhaps you'll see some same themes, but I do think particularly your sun sign being different is a somewhat of a big deal. And so you could also say, well, perhaps I'm going to work with the Vedic because I'm drawn to the Indian system or the Indian culture. That's why I was thinking perhaps for a while that I might learn more Vedic because I really like Vedic palmistry. And I work with Tara, the goddess, who has she has her origins in India. So in some way, spiritually, I do feel aligned with some of the teachings of the Vedic things. And maybe, you can still use both. Maybe Western is good for psychology. I don't know. But it would be nice if more people would sort of really sit down and take the time to say, let's think of some theories that might explain why these differences exist. So that's one of my pet peeves. The other thing that, because of technology and the ease in which you can now cast a chart, also the discovery of all the asteroids, there's just too many planetary bodies to consider. And I know that, some people, perhaps they have that brain that likes the complexity, but most of us, it's very overwhelming to determine if I am going to learn to work with my chart on my own and get to know it. What should I focus on? Should I focus on the asteroids more? What about the fixed stars? And now, if an astrologer decides to specialize, which I've met astrologers that have specialized in something, I actually feel that is a good way to use it. I've met people that have specialized in Saturn. I've met a person specializing in Chiron. And because then they have time to really go deeply into that particular planetary object, whatever it is. So I think that's a really wonderful thing that some astrologers do. But when you see at least some of the more public astrologers and also people that, like myself perhaps, that post about astrology, when they use so much of the information to assess a moment in time, it really feels a lot like they're throwing jargon at you. And it's, if I can't understand it, then I don't think you really understand what you're saying. I remember when I went to hear a physics lecture, it was in Nova Scotia actually, and it was, I forget the woman, but she was part of a team that won the Nobel Prize for whatever it was. And it was one of those free lectures. I was back in school. And she had this little old lady in the front in the audience. And every now and then she'd say, "Do you understand me?" And she used her as her reference point. And as a result, we all understood the complexities that she was talking about. She was able to translate it into something that was a public lecture. That takes a specific skill set, but also you have to want to. So I think that there's often this hiding behind a whole bunch of jargon with, oh, well, Saturn is conjunct Uranus, square the fixed star this, and out of orbit and for 10 days and on and on and on. And I've sometimes I just fall asleep reading all that. So, and again, for maybe if you were looking at a technical article in astrology, perfectly fine. But we're talking about, these are things that are for the general public. And that it really sort of bothers me that people don't realize they're doing that. And also they're hiding behind their own, either they don't understand or they're just trying to show off a little bit. I don't know. And it strikes me like that sometimes. I know, like I said, there are some people that are able to make it really fun and humorous and still put in enough information. So if you want to know where they're getting it from, but I think there's just too much information. Is it really all relevant? You have some astrologers that will only use the classical planets. And I can see why, because I do think you can get a lot out of the basics. And I mean, a lot. And you don't necessarily have to, go after all of the goodies that are out there. Now, again, there are certainly reasons why an asteroid or a fixed star could be important in your chart, depending on where it is. But again, I'm talking more sort of on a general basis, that I think it's just overly complex. The other thing that did not bother me in the beginning, because I would do it, is this historical research idea of transits. And so first I was super excited about it. I was like, oh, I did it with Chiron. When Chiron moved back into Pisces, I looked at the last time it was in Pisces, and I only looked at the one time. And I guessed and got some things right, I think, but I really don't think it was that thorough. And initially, I really enjoyed articles. I think even mentioned one. Well, that one was a really in-depth one where the person went back with Neptune and Aries over a long period of time. So I did appreciate that. But even so, I've been thinking about for the last, maybe year is it really accurate? Is it just a good way to begin your understanding of the current transit? Because every transit, as we know, is going to still be unique. It's unique in time. It's unique with other planets that are involved in the transit. Yes, there are, astrology loves patterns and cycles. But one of the things I've noticed when I've taken the time to look more deeply into, say, like when I look at the retrograde, I will sometimes go back in my journals and look at what I was writing in the last time, Venus was retrograde in Scorpio. I did that and it was really fascinating. And so I realized that it takes a lot of time to do, I think, research that might really begin to see patterns on a deeper level. So I think there's sort of a confirmation bias going on with some of the historical ideas, and also seeing like, okay, I looked at, for instance, there's a lot going on with Uranus and Gemini in the United States and how that's, happened during the Civil War. Well, what about all the other times, and how is it statistically relevant? So here's where I think AI might come in handy. Someone out there that is in astrology or is just interested in developing a program where AI could gather a huge amount of statistics and over a huge amount of time and begin to analyze whether or not there are any patterns. Because one of the problems would be, I think that there's not enough data in any of this research. And I think that now that we have AI, that would be a great idea to use AI for that. So you wouldn't have to necessarily spend all the time, and that could produce some results. But, I think that it has to be more precise. And then, of course, history is written by a certain people. And I began to think about, for instance, the Native American people in the United States, what was happening to them during these transits. And I don't know their history. How am I going to research what was going on, the different things, and even looking at things more from like an ecological point of view, or maybe from the ocean's point of view. So there's this overemphasis on a certain kind of human being. It's overemphasis on history that is really written by the victors. So I'm not sure I'm quite as excited about the whole research, other than, sometimes I like what I learn. It's fun to learn new things with history. So that's another thing. I just wish they wouldn't make it sound like, well, this happened in, 1640, so it's a good chance it's going to happen again. That's with this sort of attitude of being, it's like a closed attitude. Like, I know, this is, again, I guess that's an ego thing, needing to feel like you're right about the astrological interpretations, which good luck with that. Then the other thing is, and this sort of is a little bit, not so much astrology, but you certainly can't separate astrology from the community, is this has really been bothering me for a while. And I'm not the only one that thinks it's inaccurate. Thank God I'm not alone in this. Sometimes I just think I'm just irritated by something and no one else is. I'm like, why am I so irritated? Is how a lot of the astrological community that makes a public platform, and maybe they have things they sell, and maybe there's certainly legitimate things they're selling, is they pander too much to the public, what the public wants astrologically. And the public often wants quick things. They want to know that this moon coming up, I can transform my whole life in one day. They really, and I don't think it's fair to the public, and certainly not everyone in the public goes for it, but it is pretty popular. You see these kind of clickbait articles about the next Mercury retrograde, or the fact that Pluto moved in Aquarius, and oh my God, everything's going to be war, and all these, overly dramatic interpretations, sweeping interpretations that really don't hold up a lot of times. And I really wish they would not do that. And then this sun sign astrology still exists, where somebody will do a whole series of, this is what the year is like for all Cancers, all Capricorns, which we know really isn't going to work because your natal chart is a beautiful snowflake and you're very unique. And I've had people even say they don't feel like their sun sign because they have other planets that are more prominent in their chart. So I know someone particularly who has their sun in the 12th house. And so it makes them feel not quite like that particular sign it's in. I forget which one it is. But so I feel like there's this sort of overly dramatic, trying to get people's attention, vying for it. There's a really, I've listened enough to enough people that are popular, that know astrology, that it's almost always more negative than positive, no matter what the transit. And we've talked about this, Michael and I, where it's much easier to predict something bad than to do something that at least has some advice or hope. And I sort of wonder if I am a knowledgeable astrologer with a public platform, isn't it my responsibility if I see something that is a difficult transit in the past, it has a history of it, to give advice to people instead of, oh no, here it comes again and it's going to be war or whatever it is. And isn't it my isn't it my responsibility to either advise people how to handle it, or if it's far enough ahead, say I'm looking at the next 20 years, perhaps I can even indicate these are changes we could make. Will people make it? Maybe not, but at least you're putting it out there. You're seeding things so that we're not, being so robotic. And by the way, there's still this unconscious tendency for many people that love astrology to blame astrology for everything. And yes, there are some forces like the ocean is a powerful force and it could certainly take me out with a tidal wave. But at the same time, if I was paying attention perhaps that day and I saw there was warnings, I could run away from the tidal wave, So sometimes, yes, we get smacked by nature, but there are many times where we can see something and we can avoid it. There's at least enough times. And so I don't understand this. Even from people I respect, I've heard them, they're subtly blaming the planets, and particularly, the ones that really get blamed a lot are, Mars. Oh my God, poor Mars. I used to think poor Mercury retrograde, but lately it's Mars, war this, war that, anger this and violence that. And that's not the only, even astrologers say that's not the only interpretation of Mars. I love particularly Aaron Sullivan's view of Mars sort of having this dual nature in mythology, where there's one god of Mars who's this huge giant that has tantrums, and the other one is the one that's courageous and is a warrior. So it's in astrology. That's the irony. So why do astrologers do it? I can understand people that don't know anything about astrology saying opinions about things, as we know people like to do, talk about things they don't know anything about. But it's baffling to me, and it really does bother me when I say, you know better. I'll be sitting there going, you know better. That's not true. Why are you planting those seeds? So that's another thing. Now this is more of something I wanted to pass on. And I heard from an astrologer years ago, and I wouldn't say I'm annoyed about this, but there's no real visual of your chart that really shows you what it was like in the incredible sky around you when all the planets were in the positions they were. So I remember my friend Esther Francis, she once said years ago, she thought that charts would become 3D and that you would somehow see the planets. And I think that would really actually change our views of astrology if it was more visual and you could see the complexity of it all, and you can see the planets in relationship with each other. I think, again, we're at a place where this could happen technically, and it would just take some really, technically minded either astronomy people, astronomy people to create something like that, because I think that would really help to see that astrology is a very dynamic and not this, sheet of paper with these. I do think the glyphs are cool, but it would really, I think, bring it to another level. So in a way, I feel it's so funny. Astrology, in some ways, I think it as a whole thinks it's advancing on its knowledge. And I don't think necessarily in the way, for instance, astronomy is. So that's the other thing I would like to see more of. And there are some astrologers that you can see are very much into astronomy too. That astrologers themselves are equally interested in what's happening with the knowledge that we're going to be having with with astronomy and the cosmos. It's just mind blowing. And I do think it can have an influence on how we interpret the planets and the energies and our place in the world. So I'm not sure what that would be. And that's more of really a suggestion, which I was going to make maybe a few. And before I forget, that I was sort of drawn today because I think I was thinking about the channel, the KRS channel, because one of the things I really like about him is in one of his videos, he talked about when you talk to people and what you tell them, he's not going to say certain negative things, even if he thinks in astrology it might exist. He says you have to be very careful of the karma. You're there to help people and advise them. And he's very careful with that. And so I went back and I said, I've always enjoyed his videos. And even though I don't understand the Vedic, and I found on his page for his channel, and his name is Kapil Raj, he said the following just about astrology in general, which sort of is, I thought it was great. He said, here and on his channel, you will learn the true secrets of your zodiac signs and horoscope. I don't teach regular astrology forecast for daily, weekly, or monthly horoscopes. I give you the real insights of your horoscope. I talk about planetary placement in each individual chart of the person. I've made videos on planets through houses, planets through signs, and talking about each astrological ascendant. If you need your daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly forecast, you need to go one-on-one to an astrologer, because the general description many astrologers give will not apply to you based on your individual horoscope. This is why many of them fail and puts more distrust in the science of astrology. I was so blown away. I was like, yes, that's exactly what I think. But it's people still want that, okay, what does it mean for me when Mercury's retrograde in Pisces without knowing their chart? And it may mean nothing, may not even be aspecting any of your planets at the time. So I think there are, and he's got a big following. So I'm pleased that someone like him is using his platform to really present, I think, the astrology in the long run that is the most helpful. And, astrology is not a quick fix at any time. You really do have to take the time to learn it, or if you want to go to a reader, make sure you're going to someone that really knows what they're talking about and has a good experience doing it. I think it can be extremely helpful, but unfortunately, the love-hate relationship I have is probably not going to be changing anytime soon because of some of the popular, platforms of astrologers that say exactly what, the KRS channel said, don't do, basically. And there's certainly nothing I can do about that, but except to share that, there are people that want you to get something, that you're going to get something out of it that can actually help your life. And I can tell you it has helped me tremendously at times when I've looked at it precisely in my own chart, trying to understand the energies and trying to take the advice of the energies, because that's the other thing, is you have to be willing to say, okay, this is a difficult transit, so what would be the advice of it? Do I just wait it out? Do I have to take certain steps? And I have a good story, maybe another time, when my father was evicted, how the transit really helped me make decisions by knowing it was a very tricky transit, actually. So anyway, that's my story, my little rant about my love-hate relationship with astrology. I hope it helps. Join us next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together, and have a cosmic week.